The whip came down before she could cry out. Eliza Harper hit the desert floor supplies, scattered hands bleeding too exhausted to stand. Caleb Thornton's voice cut through the dry Arizona air like a second blow. "That's what weak looks like, boys. Look at her. Can't even carry her own weight." No one moved. No one spoke. But one man standing far back, quiet as stone, watched her try to rise, and fail, and try again. That moment cost him everything he swore he'd never risk again. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and follow Eliza's story all the way to the end. I promise you it is worth every minute. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The morning Eliza Harper arrived at the Thornton Ranch, the sun had not yet cleared the canyon walls, and the Arizona sky was still the color of bruised iron. She stepped down from the supply wagon with nothing but a worn traveling bag, a letter of employment she had read so many times. The folds had gone soft, and the quiet, desperate hope of a woman who had run out of other choices. She was 23 years old. She did not look it. The months before had done something to her face, tightened it, hollowed it slightly beneath the cheekbones, pulled the softness away from around her eyes, and replaced it with something watchful. She was not broken yet, but she had been bent and bent hard, and she carried that in the way she held her shoulders slightly forward, slightly braced the posture of someone who had learned to expect the blow before it landed. Pennsylvania felt like another world now, another life, another Eliza. That Eliza had believed in reasonable men and written agreements and the basic decency of people who smiled when they shook your hand. That Eliza had trusted a labor broker named Gerald Fitch, who wore a clean collar and spoke in polished sentences about opportunity in the Western Territories, about ranches desperate for good workers, about fair wages and fresh starts and wide-open land where a woman of industry and character could build something real. She had signed the contract without reading every line. That was her first mistake. She would not understand how large that mistake was for another 3 months. The Thornton Ranch sprawled across a flat stretch of desert scrubland in the southern Arizona Territory. And it was exactly as large and exactly as unimpressive as such places tend to be. Not beautiful, not terrible, just relentless. Long wooden bunkhouses sat low to the ground. Corrals of warped timber held thin cattle. The main house was the only structure that showed any money, and it showed it the way a man with more pride than taste tends to show money, loud and joyless, with a painted porch nobody ever sat on. Caleb Thornton was standing on that porch when the wagon pulled in. He was in his late 40s, broad through the chest, with a sun-darkened face and pale eyes that moved over people the way a man's eyes move over livestock, measuring, calculating, quickly losing interest once the number was set. He had a way of smiling that used only his mouth, and he was using that smile now as he looked down at Eliza. "Miss Harper," he said, not a question, a statement of inventory. "Yes, sir." She kept her chin level. She had practiced that. "I've come regarding the position listed through Mr. Fitch's agency. Domestic work and general ranch assistance as outlined in the—" "I know what it says." He cut her off without raising his voice. That was his method. He didn't need volume. "You're lighter than I expected." "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Thornton." Something moved behind his pale eyes. Amusement, maybe, or appetite. She couldn't tell which, and both made her stomach tighten. "We'll see," he said. Then he turned and went back inside without another word, and a foreman named Dix, a lean, leather-faced man with a permanent squint, materialized from somewhere to lead Eliza to the women's quarters and explain the daily schedule. The daily schedule was not what Gerald Fitch had described. It began before dawn and ended after dark. It included hauling water from the well, preparing and serving meals for the ranch hands, cleaning the main house, laundering, mending, feeding animals, carrying supplies from the storage building to the kitchen and the kitchen to wherever Dix pointed. The wages Fitch had mentioned did not appear. When Eliza asked about them, Dix handed her a ledger page with numbers she didn't recognize and told her that her transportation, her food, her lodging, and something called an establishment fee had already been charged against her earnings. "How long until I've worked it off?" she asked. Dick squinted at the page. At current rate, 8 months, give or take. 8 months? Could be longer, depending. Depending on what? He looked at her for a moment with something that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, but lived in the neighborhood of both. On a lot of things, he said, and walked away. She lay on her bunk that first night and stared at the plank ceiling and thought about the letter she had sent her sister Margaret before leaving Pennsylvania. I have found a real opportunity, Maggie. I will write again when I am settled and earning. She thought about how long it might take for Margaret to worry. She thought about what worry would even accomplish from that distance. Then she stopped thinking about it because thinking about it made the ceiling feel lower and the air feel thinner, and she needed to sleep. Work started at 4 in the morning, and she had learned already that arriving 1 minute late to the morning fire meant your breakfast went to someone else. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. The weeks passed. The way hard weeks do not. Quickly, not slowly, just relentlessly. One task completed meant another appeared. One day survived meant another waiting. Eliza worked beside 3 other women at the ranch. Clara, who was 40 and had been there for 2 years and spoke very little. Rosa, who was 19 and cried quietly some nights and pretended she hadn't in the morning. And a woman everyone called Dutch, who was somewhere between 35 and 50 and had eyes like a woman who had made her peace with a great many things she hadn't chosen. They did not talk much at first. That was ranch life conversation cost energy, and energy was the one thing none of them had to spare. But slowly, over shared water buckets and the particular intimacy of exhaustion, they began to speak. Not about their lives before, not about their hopes, just about the immediate practical things that women in difficult circumstances use to hold each other steady. "Wrap your hands before the waterwork," Dutch told her one morning, demonstrating the strip of cloth she wound around her palms. "The skin'll go raw otherwise. Raw hands slow you down, and Dix notices." "Does Dix report to Thornton directly?" Eliza asked. "Everything reports to Thornton," Dutch said. "Don't mistake it." Clara, scrubbing beside them, said nothing. But she pressed her lips together in a way that said, "She's right, remember it." Eliza remembered it. She remembered a great many things in those first months. She remembered that Caleb Thornton moved through his own ranch like a man walking through a room he owned in the most complete sense, not just the walls and the land, but the people inside them. She remembered the way he looked at the ledger pages, not with the interest of a man concerned about fairness, but with the satisfaction of a man confirming that the numbers were working in his favor. She remembered the afternoon he stopped in the doorway of the kitchen while she was working and watched her for a full minute without speaking, and how she kept her eyes on the bread she was kneading, and her hands moving, and her face absolutely composed, and how the moment he left she had to set both hands flat on the table and breathe slowly through her nose until her heart stopped racing. She had been afraid before. She had been uncertain before. This was different. This was the particular fear of someone who has realized quietly and without drama that they are in the wrong place and that getting out is not going to be simple. By the 3rd month, the heat had become a creature of its own, not weather, but presence, pressing down on the desert from the moment the sun cleared the horizon until long after it set. Eliza had adapted to most of the physical demands of the work, but the heat was something she could not fully adapt to. It came for her differently than it came for the others, or maybe it was the accumulation of 3 months of poor sleep and inadequate food and work that never fully stopped, but her body had begun to refuse certain things. Her head ached more mornings than not. Her vision sometimes went strange at the edges if she stood up too quickly. She ate everything she was given, and it didn't seem to matter. She didn't tell anyone. She knew what it would mean if she told anyone. The morning everything changed. She had been carrying supplies from the storage building to the main kitchen. Heavy flour sacks 2 at a time, in the kind of heat that makes the air look liquid at a distance. She had made the trip 4 times already. She was halfway through the 5th when the ground tilted. It didn't tilt, of course. She knew even in the moment that the ground wasn't moving. But something behind her eyes lost its grip on level, and then her knees did something she didn't give them permission to do. And then she was on the ground with the flour sack beside her, and the Arizona dust in her face, and the brutal sun pressing down on the back of her neck like a hand. She heard voices. She heard boots on the dry ground. She was trying to get her palms flat under her, trying to push herself up when the shadow fell over her. She thought it was Dick's. It was not Dick's. Caleb Thornton crouched down so that his face was level with hers, and the first thing she saw when she raised her head was those pale, calculating eyes studying her with the expression of a man examining damaged merchandise. "Get up," he said. Her voice came out wrong, too thin. "I just need a moment." "I said get up, Miss Harper." She tried. She genuinely tried. Her arms shook with the effort, and her vision went strange at the edges again, and she could not make her legs cooperate, and after a long, awful moment, she was still on the ground. Thornton stood. He looked around at the men and women who had gathered ranch hands, the other women a group of cattle buyers who had ridden in that morning to negotiate a deal and were now standing near the fence watching. His voice when he spoke was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was patient and deliberate and completely certain of its own authority. "You see this," he said to everyone and no one in particular. "This is what I get when I hire out of Eastern agencies. Women who can't handle a day's real work." He looked back down at Eliza, and the contempt in his face was so thorough it seemed almost philosophical, not personal anger, but a firmly held worldview being confirmed. "You knew what this work required when you signed that contract. You agreed to it. And now you're lying in my yard because you're too weak to carry flour. Mr. Thornton!" It was Rosa's voice from somewhere behind Eliza, small and frightened. "She's been ill. She hasn't—" "Nobody asked you." He didn't even look at Rosa. "Miss Harper, I want you to look around at every person standing here and understand something. In this territory, weakness is not a misfortune. It is a failure. It is a choice. And women who make that choice don't last here." He reached down. For one confused, relieved moment, Eliza thought he was going to help her up. Instead, he took the flour sack from the ground beside her. He dropped it on her back. "Start carrying," he said. The sound that went through the watching crowd was not protest. It was the particular silence of people who want to look away, but find they can't quite manage it. Eliza felt the weight of the sack on her spine, and the weight of every eye on her face, and she thought quite clearly and quite calmly, "I will not cry. Whatever else happens, I will not give him that." She got her hands under her. She pushed. She got to one knee, then both knees. Then, shaking so badly she could feel it in her back teeth, she got one foot under her, then the other, and she was standing, barely standing, listing slightly, but standing with the flour sack balanced across her shoulders, and her chin level, and her eyes dry. Something moved at the edge of the crowd. She didn't see it then. She was focused entirely on staying upright, on putting one foot in front of the other on the 15 feet of ground between her and the kitchen door. She made it. She didn't know afterward how she made it, but she did, and she set the flour sack down and pressed both hands against the kitchen wall and breathed. Behind her, she could hear Thornton returning to his conversation with the cattle buyers. She could hear his voice resuming its comfortable, confident rhythm. She could hear, or imagined, she could hear the sound of the watching crowd dispersing. What she did not hear, because she was too focused on breathing and not falling down, was the sound of a pair of boots separating from the rest of the group and moving in a different direction. Not toward the main house, not toward the corrals, toward the kitchen door. She heard the knock, 2 quiet raps on the doorframe, and turned. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not imposingly tall, just the natural tallness of a man who had spent years in the kind of outdoor work that keeps the body lean and the posture straight. He wore trail clothes that had seen real use, not the costume of a man playing at ranching, but the worn, practical clothing of someone who actually did the work. His hat was in his hands. That detail registered somewhere in the part of Eliza's mind that was still observing things clearly. He had taken his hat off. That meant something. His face was not handsome exactly, not in the easy arranged way of men who know they are handsome. It was a face that had weathered things, lines at the corners of his eyes, a jaw that carried its angles without apology. He was maybe 35, and he looked like someone who had been 35 for a long time, in the way that certain men get, not aged, just settled, like the land they spend their time in. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not pity. She was alert for pity. She had become very good at identifying it, and she did not want it. Not the careful blankness of someone who has witnessed something uncomfortable and wants to signal that it is none of their business. Something else. Something more focused. Like a man who has just made a decision and is now looking at the first consequence of it. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't an absence of volume, but a deliberate choice of it, the voice of someone who doesn't speak unless they mean to. "I'm fine," she said. Which was not true, but she was not going to discuss that with a stranger. "That was an ugly thing," he said. Simply, not with outrage or performance. Just a plain statement of fact like observing the temperature. Eliza looked at him for a moment. "It's none of your concern, mister." "Cole," he said. "Nathan Cole. I've got a spread about 9 miles northeast of here." He paused. "I came in this morning to negotiate some cattle from Thornton." "Then I'd suggest you get back to your negotiating, Mr. Cole. I need to finish the supply run." She turned back to the kitchen. She heard him shift his weight behind her, not leaving, just adjusting. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She stopped. 3 months. "You from back east, Pennsylvania?" "Long way to come." "Yes," she said. "It is." There was a silence. In that silence, she was acutely aware of how she must look. Dusty, shaking slightly, her dress damp with perspiration, her hair coming down from its pins in pieces. She was also aware, with a kind of irritated clarity, that she did not have the luxury of caring how she looked. "What did he mean?" Nathan Cole said quietly. "About a contract." She turned back around. He was watching her with that same focused expression, hat still in his hands. There was something in the way he was standing. Weight settled evenly, not leaning, not crowding, that made the question feel less like an intrusion, and more like the question of someone who was actually trying to understand something. She studied him for a moment. Then she told him. Not everything, not the full story, not the way she would have told it if she had the time and the privacy and the emotional reserves for that kind of telling. But the relevant facts, the agency in Pennsylvania, the broker named Fitch, the contract she had signed, the arrival, the ledger with its debts that seemed to grow rather than shrink, the wages she had not yet seen. Nathan Cole listened without interrupting. His face did not change expression. His hands were still on the brim of his hat. When she finished, he nodded once, slowly. "What's the number?" he said. "On the ledger." "I beg your pardon. The debt they say you owe. What's the number?" She told him. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like confirmation of something he had already suspected. He put his hat back on. "Finish your supply run," he said. "Stay out of Thornton's way the rest of the afternoon." "Mr. Cole, I'm going to go finish my business with Thornton," he said. "Just stay out of his way for a few hours." And he walked away. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him go, and thought that man is either about to do something very foolish or something very specific, and I cannot determine which. She finished her supply run. She stayed out of Thornton's way. What she didn't see, because she wasn't there, was the conversation that happened in Caleb Thornton's office in the main house about 2 hours later. She heard about it afterward, pieces of it from Clara, and from one of the ranch hands who had been near the window, but the full shape of it she only understood later. Nathan Cole had gone in to complete the cattle negotiation he had come for. He was by all accounts the same man in that office that he had been standing at the kitchen door, quiet, direct, unhurried. He had agreed to buy 23 head of cattle at the price Thornton wanted. He had made the negotiation easy, which put Thornton in a good mood. And then, at the end, when the deal was all but concluded, he had said in the same level, conversational voice he used for everything, "I'd like to settle one more matter while I'm here." Thornton had looked at him. "What matter?" "The woman you've got under labor contract, Harper. A pause. What about her? I'd like to take on her debt. The silence that followed that statement lasted, according to the ranch hand near the window, a full 10 seconds. What? Thornton said. Her establishment fees, transportation, whatever the current total is. I'll pay it against the cattle purchase price. Nathan's voice hadn't changed. You get the same money I take on the contract liability. Clean transaction. Thornton leaned back. And why would you want to do a thing like that? I'm short-handed at my spread, Nathan said. I need a capable worker who knows domestic operations. She looks capable. It was such a practical, businesslike reason, so completely without sentiment. Thornton had looked at him for a long moment with those pale, measuring eyes, and apparently what he saw was exactly what Nathan wanted him to see, a man making a straightforward labor acquisition, nothing more, nothing less. Thornton had laughed, actually laughed. Take her, he said. Damn woman's more trouble than she's worth. I was going to have Dix run her off by end of week anyway. The paperwork was adjusted. The cattle purchase was finalized. And when Dix knocked on the kitchen door at the end of the afternoon and told Eliza to collect her things because she was leaving, and when she stepped outside into the long amber light of the Arizona evening to find Nathan Cole waiting with his horses, she had only one thought, clear and cold and frightened. I have been sold. She stopped walking. 5 feet from him, bag in hand, the light going orange around them. What did you do? She said. He looked at her steadily. Bought your contract. Bought? The word landed badly. I am not property to be bought, Mr. Cole. Whatever you may think. No, he said. You are not. He said it with such flatness, such complete certainty, that it stopped her mid-sentence. You're a woman who got tangled in a dishonest contract, and I've paid the number attached to your name in that ledger so that you don't owe Thornton anything anymore. He paused. What you owe me is nothing. I want to be clear about that. She stared at him. Nothing. Nothing. That's not... She shook her head. That isn't how this works. People don't... I'm not people, he said, not with arrogance, just with the quiet certainty of a man stating a fact about himself. I'm Nathan Cole, and I run an honest spread, and I'm telling you that you are not a debt. You are a person who deserves a chance. Now. He turned toward the horses. You can come with me, or you can stay here. I won't make you do either. But if you stay here, Dix is going to escort you to the boundary of Thornton's land with nothing but that bag, and the nearest town is 11 miles east in the dark. Eliza looked at the man in front of her. She looked at the ranch behind her, where Dix was standing at the fence, watching them with his permanent squint. She looked at the darkening sky to the east, where 11 miles of desert waited. She thought about trust, about what it had cost her the last time she extended it. She thought about the way Nathan Cole had taken his hat off before speaking to her. Where is your ranch? She asked. 9 miles northeast. Do you have other workers there? One hand. Name's Buddy. He's 62 and mostly deaf in one ear. A pause. And there's the horses. They won't bother you. Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the fear and the long, terrible wait of the last 3 months, something in Eliza's chest moved in a direction she hadn't expected. She picked up her bag. I will evaluate the situation in the morning, she said, with clear eyes. And if I determine that I am in a worse circumstance than I have just left, you can walk away, he said. I'll give you a horse. She looked at him. You'd give me a horse? Yes, ma'am. She walked to the second horse and put her foot in the stirrup. Don't call me ma'am, she said. My name is Eliza. And they rode out together into the Arizona evening, the dust rising quiet behind them, the last light burning orange along the top of the canyon walls, and Caleb Thornton's ranch growing smaller behind them until it disappeared. She didn't look back, but she did not yet look forward either. She rode in the particular suspended state of a woman who has made a decision she cannot fully evaluate, yet suspended between the thing she had left and the thing she was riding toward, between the known weight of one terrible place and the completely unknown weight of what came next. Nathan Cole rode beside her without speaking. She found after a few minutes that the silence did not feel threatening. That was something. It wasn't trust. Not yet. Not close to yet. But it was something. The canyon walls caught the last of the light. The horses moved steady beneath them. The desert air, which had been murderous all day, had dropped to something almost cool. Eliza Harper rode northeast through the Arizona dark and did not know what was waiting for her at the end of those 9 miles. She only knew one thing with any certainty. Whatever it was, it could not be worse than what she had left behind. She told herself that. She almost believed it. The 9 miles felt longer in the dark. Eliza kept her eyes forward and her spine straight and her hands steady on the reins, because those were the 3 things she could control, and controlling them kept her from thinking too hard about the fact that she was riding through unfamiliar desert territory at night, beside a man she had met approximately 4 hours ago, who had just purchased her labor contract from a man who had treated her like furniture. She was aware with a particular clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces of exactly how fragile her position was. She was also aware that she was still upright, still moving, still making choices. That counted for something. Nathan Cole rode to her left and slightly ahead, not leading exactly, more like a man who knows the terrain and moves through it without thinking about it. He hadn't spoken since they'd left Thornton's fence line. She hadn't either. The silence between them had settled into something that was not quite comfortable, but was not hostile. Either 2 people sharing space without yet knowing what that space would become. After a while he said, "You ride well." "My father kept horses," she said. "Pennsylvania farm, before." He didn't ask about the before. She noticed that filed it somewhere. "The trail gets narrower here," he said. "Single file for about a 1/4 mile. Stay close to the right edge." She did. When the trail widened again, and they came back to riding side by side, the sky above them was entirely dark now and full of stars, in the way that western skies get full of stars, not the modest scattering of the east, but something almost aggressive in its density, as if the sky were trying to prove something. She looked up at it once and then looked back down because she did not have the emotional reserves for beauty right now. Beauty required something she couldn't afford to spend. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked. Practical question. She needed information. 7 years, he said. Built it from about nothing. Alone. A pause that was brief, but held something in it. Mostly. She let that sit. "The man, buddy, he's been with you long?" 4 years. He showed up one spring looking for work and never quite left. Another pause, and this one had something almost warm in it. "He's good with horses, bad at mornings. We've made our accommodations. And the ranch is operational sustainable." He glanced sideways at her. She could see the outline of it in the dark, the turn of his head, the angle of the hat brim. "You asking if I can actually feed you?" "I'm asking if the operation I'm riding toward is one that represents an improvement over the one I've just left." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "It's small. Nothing like Thornton's spread. 22 cattle, some chickens, a kitchen garden that Buddy waters when he remembers, which isn't always. House needs work in the east wing." He paused. "But it's mine. Every inch of it. No ledgers with other people's numbers in them. No debts that move the wrong direction." Another pause. "And you'll eat," he said. "Enough. Every day." It was such a simple thing to say. Such a plain, practical promise. You'll eat enough every day. Something in Eliza's chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "All right," she said. They rode the rest of the way without talking. The ranch appeared out of the dark as a cluster of warm light. 2 windows in the main house, a lantern hung outside. What she could make out was a barn. As they rode into the yard, a shape detached itself from the porch railing and moved toward them, and she understood this was Buddy. Before Nathan said anything, because the shape was small and moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who has spent enough years doing hard work that his body negotiates every movement in advance. He was maybe 62, maybe older, with a face that had been thoroughly weathered and a posture that suggested he had once been taller and had gradually come to terms with the compression of years. He was looking at Eliza with the direct, uncomplicated curiosity of someone who doesn't spend much time managing his expressions. "You brought a woman," he said to Nathan. Not accusatory, just observational, like noting that he'd brought back unexpected weather. "This is Miss Eliza Harper," Nathan said, dismounting. "She'll be staying." "Staying how long?" "Buddy?" "It's a reasonable question." Buddy looked at Eliza, who had dismounted and was standing with her bag evaluating him in return. "You hungry, Miss Harper?" "Profoundly," she said. Something in his face shifted into what she suspected was his version of a smile. "I got beans and cornbread. It ain't fancy." "It sounds like the best meal I've heard of in 3 months. He looked at Nathan. "I like her," he said, and turned and walked back toward the house. Nathan took both horses' reins. He glanced at her. "House is unlocked. I'll be in after I stable them." She walked toward the light. The inside of Nathan Cole's house was exactly what she had expected from a man who lived alone with one elderly ranch hand, functional, somewhat sparse, thoroughly undecorated, and carrying the particular kind of male-inhabited disorder that comes not from carelessness, but from the complete absence of anyone who has ever said that doesn't go there. There was a large table that served obvious double duty as workspace and dining surface. Shelves of practical things. A fireplace with a good fire going against the desert night cold. A single framed photograph on the mantelpiece that she did not look at closely yet, because she had not been invited to. Buddy had a bowl of beans and a slab of cornbread waiting at the table by the time she set her bag down. She sat and ate. She didn't speak while she ate. Buddy didn't either, which she appreciated. He moved around the kitchen with the unhurried efficiency of a man who has performed the same tasks so many times they require no thought, occasionally glancing at her with that same direct, uncomplicated interest. When she finished the bowl, he took it without asking and refilled it. She ate that too. When Nathan came in from the barn, he looked at the empty bowls and then at Eliza, and she said before he could speak, "I was hungry." "Shh, I can see that," he said. No judgment in it. He washed his hands at the basin, and Buddy set a bowl in front of him, and the three of them sat at the table together in the firelit kitchen. An odd, improbable constellation of people, and the strangeness of it. The sheer unexpected domesticity of it. After 3 months of what she had just left sat somewhere behind Eliza's sternum and pressed. She didn't let it show. She was good at not letting things show. After a while, Nathan said, "There's a room at the end of the hall. It's got a bed that's been made up proper. Buddy did that." He said it as if he wanted to be clear about the attribution. "It's yours, for as long as you need it." "And the terms," Eliza said. Her voice was steady. She needed the terms stated clearly. "What do you expect in return?" Nathan looked at her for a moment. Not with offense. Something more patient. "Whatever you're able to give while you recover," he said. "Kitchen work if you're up to it. Help with the garden when you're stronger. Nothing that's beyond you. Nothing that'll break you down further." He picked up his coffee cup. "When you're well, we can talk about whether you want to stay on permanent and what fair wages look like. Or you can leave when you're ready with a horse and enough supplies to get you somewhere. Either way. And if I decide to leave tomorrow, then you leave tomorrow." She watched him. "Why?" she said quietly. He set the coffee cup down. The fire shifted behind them. "Because it was wrong," he said. "What I saw today. And I don't walk away from wrong when I can do something about it." It was such a plain answer. So stripped of performance, so lacking in the self-congratulation she might have expected from a man announcing his own heroism. He said it the way he said everything flat and factual, as if it were simply the most obvious explanation available. She looked down at the table. "I need to sleep," she said. Because she did desperately, and because she was getting dangerously close to a feeling she could not afford to have in front of these men. "Down the hall," Nathan said. "Last door on the left." She stood. She picked up her bag. She stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Nathan." She paused. "Nathan." It felt strange in her mouth, personal in a way she hadn't intended. "Thank you." He nodded once, nothing more. She walked down the hall and opened the last door on the left and found a room that was simple and clean, with a bed that had indeed been made up properly, with a quilt that had seen better decades, but was folded neatly at the foot, and she sat on the edge of that bed and pressed both hands over her face and breathed. She did not cry, but it was close. She lay down still dressed and pulled the quilt over herself and was asleep before she could think another complete thought. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, the light through the small window was midday bright, and she could hear Buddy somewhere outside making the particular kind of noise that old men make when they are doing physical work and narrating it quietly to themselves. She lay still for a moment, ceiling watching in the new room, conducting the rapid internal assessment that had become her first act of every morning for the past 3 months. Where am I? What is my situation? What is expected of me today? What are the dangers? The assessment came out different than it had on any morning in recent memory. She got up. She found the wash basin and the pitcher of water on the small table by the window, washed her face and hands, repinned her hair, shook out her dress as best she could. Then she picked up her bag, pulled out the small hand mirror she had managed to keep through everything, and looked at herself. She looked tired. She looked thinner than she should. She looked like someone who had spent 3 months being told they were less than they were. "Stop it," she said quietly to the mirror, meaning stop looking like that. Mean it less. Don't let it set. She put the mirror away and went to find the kitchen. Nathan was not in the house. Buddy was at the kitchen table with a bridle he was mending, and he looked up when she appeared in the doorway and nodded at the stove, where a covered pot held something warm. "Ate already," he said, meaning himself. "That's for you." She found a bowl served herself, sat down across from him. He went back to the bridle. She ate. After a while, "He goes out early," Buddy said without being asked. "Most mornings sunup, checking fences, checking the herd. Back by midday usually." "Does he always work alone?" "Mostly. He had a partner once." Buddy's hands kept moving on the bridle. Things changed. She waited to see if he would say more. He didn't. She didn't push. "What needs doing around here?" she asked. He looked up, studied her. "You sure you're up to it? I slept 14 hours, she said. "I'm as up to it as I'm going to be today." Something that might have been approval moved through his weathered face. He set the bridle down. "Well," he said, "the kitchen garden is in a state, and the main room needs something done about it, though, I'll be honest with you, I don't entirely know what." "I'll find it," she said. She found it. The garden first. She worked it for 2 hours in the midday heat, which was fierce but not the crushing, annihilating heat of the Thornton Ranch, which had something to do with the elevation and the way the canyon walls created shadow at intervals. The garden was not hopeless. It had been neglected, but not destroyed. Whoever had planted it had known what they were doing. The structure was sound, the soil was decent, it just needed attention and clearing, and some decisions made about what to keep and what to cut back. She made those decisions. Then the main room, which she attacked with the systematic thoroughness of a woman who finds deep emotional relief in imposing order on physical space. She didn't transform it. She didn't try. But she cleaned and arranged and found where things actually wanted to be versus where they had ended up, and when she was done, the room felt like a space that a person had intentionally inhabited rather than a space that had gradually accumulated a person. She was standing in the middle of it, evaluating when she heard boots on the porch. Nathan came in and stopped. He looked at the room. He looked at her. He looked at the room again. "I hope that was all right," she said, preemptively. "I needed to do something useful. It's..." He seemed to be locating the right word. It looks different. Better or worse? He took his hat off, looked around again. Better, he said. Considerably. Good. She brushed her hands on her skirt. The garden is also in better shape. It'll need consistent attention, but there's no reason it shouldn't be producing well within a few weeks. She paused. You have good soil up here. He was watching her with that expression again, the focused one, like a man who has made a calculation and is now waiting to see if it proves out. You didn't have to do all that today, he said. You were supposed to be resting. Resting makes me anxious, she said. Working makes me feel like myself. A silence. Then, all right, he said. But eat something before you do anything else. Buddy said you only had the one bowl at midday. Buddy is reporting to you about my food consumption. Buddy reports everything, Nathan said. He's got nothing else to fill the time. From somewhere outside, as if on cue, Buddy's voice carried in through the open door. I can hear you both perfectly well, thank you. Eliza looked at Nathan. The corner of his mouth moved, not a full smile, barely even the suggestion of one, but something. A shift of expression that changed the whole geography of his face for just a moment. It was the first time she had seen anything like that from him. She filed it away without deciding what to do with it. The days that followed had a rhythm she had not expected, a rhythm that, unlike Thornton's ranch, was defined by the work rather than by punishment. She woke when she woke. She ate. She worked on what needed working on. She asked Nathan when she needed information. He answered without condescension. She told him when she had opinions. He listened without dismissing her. Buddy muttered at everything and everyone equally, and had somehow become within about 72 hours a person she was genuinely fond of. Her body healed. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily, the way real healing goes, not a single moment of restoration, but 1,000 small improvements that accumulate, until one morning you realize you carried the water buckets without thinking about it, without calculating how much it would cost you. That morning came about 2 weeks in. She was at the well, and she pulled the bucket up and walked to the garden with it and poured it and went back for another, and it was only on the third trip that she realized she hadn't thought once about whether she could manage it. Her body had just done it. Quietly, without drama, while she was thinking about something else. She stood at the well and pressed her hand flat against her chest and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like herself. Not the herself from Pennsylvania, exactly. That woman felt distant now, belonging to a past that she was no longer sure was entirely relevant. But herself, in some more essential way, the self that could assess a problem and solve it, that could work hard and take satisfaction in the work, that could look at a space or a situation and see what it needed. She had thought Caleb Thornton had broken that. She was deeply, fiercely glad he had not. That afternoon, she found Nathan in the barn, working on the tack that needed repair, more of it than he had probably admitted she had noticed, because he was a man who managed things quietly rather than cataloging his problems. And she sat on a hay bale across from him and said, "Tell me about the cattle operation, the business structure of it." He looked up. "Why? Because I'd like to understand what I'm part of," she said. "And because I have some experience with accounts from my father's farm and your supply ledger in the kitchen, is it could be more organized." Something in his face moved. "You looked at my ledger." "It was on the kitchen table. I wasn't snooping." A pause. "You're underselling your beef to the Donovan operation in Flagstaff by about 15% based on current territory prices." A silence. "How do you know current territory prices?" "I asked Buddy. He reads the territorial paper when he can get it." Another pause. "He's been getting it regularly. There are 8 months of them stacked beside his bunk. He didn't mention them to you." Nathan set down the piece of tack he was holding. He looked at her with an expression that had moved beyond focused into something more complicated. "No," he said. "He did not. I also found an invoice from October that appears to be a double charge from your feed supplier that you have not disputed." A longer silence. "Eliza," he said. "Yes." "How long have you been looking at my paperwork?" "About a week," she said. I didn't change anything. I see the numbers, and I see what they should be, and I see where they aren't. It's just how I think." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry if that overstepped." He was quiet for a long moment, looking at her in that way he had. Then he picked the tack back up. "What's the October invoice number?" he said. She told him from memory. He stopped working, stared at her. "You have the invoice numbers memorized." "I have numbers," she said simply. "They stay in my head. I can't help it." He sat back. And for the second time since she'd met him, that shift happened in his face, that brief, rare alteration of his expression into something warmer and more open than his default. "Lord," he said, not exactly to her, more to the universe in general. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said, and he said it with a certainty that felt like more than an answer about the ledger. "It's not a problem at all." What happened next was not dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic, which is perhaps why it mattered more than anything dramatic could have. Over the following weeks, the shape of the ranch shifted. Not because of grand gestures or single transformative moments, but because Eliza, once she understood the structure of something, could not help improving it. She reorganized the supply ordering so that it required 2 fewer trips to town per month. She caught 2 more billing errors from the feed supplier. She began keeping a separate record of cattle weights and health indicators that, when she showed it to Nathan after 3 weeks, made him go very still and then say slowly, "If this data holds, the Henderson herd has stronger yield weight than the Donovan lines," she said. "By about 12% on average, if you shifted your breeding priorities. We'd need to talk to Henderson about the bull fees." "I already know what he charges," she said. "Buddy told me it's viable." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "Eliza," he said. "Yes." "Were you always like this?" She thought about it seriously. "I don't know," she said. "I think so. I think I was taught that it wasn't appropriate, so I learned to do it more quietly." She paused. "Thornton's ranch was the first time I'd had enough to do that nobody could tell me to stop. That man used your mind to run his operation and called you weak." She looked at him. The flatness in his voice when he said it, not anger exactly, but something colder and more fundamental than anger. "Yes," she said. He looked away. His jaw set in a way she was learning to read the way it set when he was turning something over internally that he wasn't ready to put into words. She let him turn it. She had learned that about him too in these weeks, that he needed the space to arrive at things in his own time, and that if she gave him that space, he would arrive, and when he arrived, he would mean it. "Nobody's going to tell you to stop here," he said finally, still not looking at her. "Whatever you see that needs doing, whatever you think of, nobody's going to tell you it isn't appropriate." The thing in her chest that had been pressing for weeks pressed harder. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. Once. And picked up the fence report she'd prepared and went back to studying it, and she looked at the top of his hat and thought something she was not ready to examine clearly yet, but could feel at the edges of herself warming like a fire just catching. The letter from Clara arrived the following Tuesday. It came through a Mexican trader who moved between ranches, folded small and written in the careful hand of a woman who hadn't had much practice writing. Eliza opened it in the kitchen alone and read it twice. Then she sat down. Clara wrote plainly, which was the only way Clara wrote anything. Things had gotten worse at Thornton's ranch since Eliza left. Thornton had hired 2 new women from the same agency to replace the workers he'd run off. The debt numbers on their ledger pages were larger than anything he'd used before. And Rosa, 19-year-old Rosa, who cried quietly at night, had tried to leave last week and been brought back by 2 of Thornton's men and given formal written notice that she owed twice what the ledger said because of the cost of retrieval. "I don't know what you can do from where you are," Clara wrote. "Maybe nothing. I just thought you should know." Eliza folded the letter carefully. She sat with it for a long time. Then she got up and went to find Nathan. He was at the fence line on the northern property edge, and she walked the full distance because she needed the walk, needed the time to be certain of what she was going to say before she said it. He saw her coming from a distance. She could tell by the way he straightened, the way he turned to face her, And by the time she reached him, he was watching her face with the close attention of a man who has learned that when Eliza Harper walks somewhere with that expression, something has happened that matters. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. She watched his face. His jaw did the thing it did. Then he looked up. "How many workers does he have under this system?" he said. "At minimum, from what I saw, 6, she said. "Probably more that I didn't know about." "And this is the same contract structure you were under?" "The same one, or worse versions of it." He looked at the letter again. Then he looked at the distance the way he did when he was turning something over. "I know a man in Prescott," he said slowly. "Territorial court clerk. Good man, honest." A pause. "If those contract terms can be shown to constitute unlawful confinement forced labor under fraudulent debt." "They can," she said. "I know they can. Because I lived it. And I know exactly what the contract says because I signed the same one." He looked at her. "You still have yours." "I have it memorized," she said. That look again. That complicated, focused, deeply attentive look that she was learning meant he was not just hearing her, but actually taking in what she was. The full weight and dimension of her, as if he was still discovering things, and each discovery adjusted something in him. "All right," he said. "All right, we're going to do something," she said. "Or all right, you're thinking about it." "All right, we're going to do something," he said. And there was something in his voice beneath the level quiet of it that she felt rather than heard, something that matched the thing in her own chest. The thing that had been warming at the edges for weeks. The thing she still wasn't ready to name. She nodded. And somewhere in the territorial distance, 9 miles to the south, Caleb Thornton sat behind his ledger and his painted porch and his pale measuring eyes, and had no idea that the woman he had called too weak to survive was sitting in the kitchen of a small mountain ranch with a copy of his contract memorized in her head. A man she trusted beside her, and the beginning of something he was not going to be able to stop. Nathan rode to Prescott the next morning before dawn. He didn't wake Eliza to tell her. She heard him go, the sound of hooves on dry ground, pulling her from sleep at some dark hour. And she lay in the quiet that followed and understood, without needing to be told, that he had decided not to wait. That once Nathan Cole decided a thing, he moved on it. She was learning that about him. She got up. She went to the kitchen. She wrote down everything she remembered about the contract, every clause, every fee structure, every mechanism by which Thornton's system trapped workers in debt that grew faster than wages could reduce it. She wrote for 2 hours in the pre-dawn dark, filling 3 pages in her small, precise hand. And when she was done, she folded the pages and put them in the kitchen drawer where Nathan kept important papers, and then she started the morning fire and waited. Buddy came in at sunrise, looked at the fire, looked at her, looked at the empty place where Nathan's horse usually stood in the yard. "Prescott," he said. "Prescott," she confirmed. He sat down. She poured him coffee. They sat in the particular companionable silence of 2 people who have run out of the need to fill quiet with noise. After a while, Buddy said, "He doesn't do things halfway." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said. "When he decides something's worth doing," Buddy said, wrapping both hands around his cup. "It's like watching a river change course. Slow to start. Then nothing's going to stop it." She looked at her own cup. "Is that what this looks like to you?" He looked at her with those direct, uncomplicated eyes. "That's what you look like to me," he said. "Both of you." She didn't answer that, but she felt it land somewhere she wasn't ready to examine. Nathan came back the following evening with mud on his boots and a name written on a folded paper, James Whitfield, Territorial Court Clerk, Prescott, who had read the contract terms Nathan described and used words like fraudulent inducement and unlawful debt peonage, and "I'll need documented testimony from workers currently under the system." He had also apparently mentioned a territorial judge named Harlan Cross who had been looking for exactly this kind of case to set a precedent with. "He wants written testimony," Nathan said, sitting at the kitchen table with the folded paper and a cup of coffee. "From at least 3 current workers. Clara Rosa, anyone else who can write or dictate." "Clara can write," Eliza said immediately. Rosa can dictate to Clara. Can we get word to them without Thornton knowing? Eliza thought about the Mexican trader who had delivered Clara's letter. Yes, she said. I think so. Then that's the first step. He looked at the 3 pages she had written, which she had placed in front of him when he sat down. He had been reading them while he talked. He looked up. This is the contract. From memory, every clause. He stared at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the pages. This is enough to start, he said. Whitfield said a document like this combined with worker testimony would be enough to compel a court inquiry. How long will it take? Weeks, maybe. Depends on Cross's schedule and how fast we can get testimony. His jaw set in the way it did. Thornton's going to find out we're coming for him before we're ready. That's the risk. What does he do when he feels threatened? Nathan's eyes met hers. He gets ahead of it, he said. Makes the first move. He's done it before. What did he do before? A pause. Something moved through Nathan's expression, not evasion, but the careful movement of a man stepping around something sharp. He ruined a man named Peters, he said. Small rancher. Peters had complained to the county seat about Thornton's water rights. 2 months later, Peters' cattle started dying. Then his fencing. Then a fire that nobody could prove wasn't accidental. He set the pages down. Peters sold out and left the territory. Eliza took that in, sat with it. So he destroys things he can't control, she said. Yes. Then we need to move faster than he expects. She looked at Nathan steadily. And we need more than testimony. We need the ledger itself, the actual record book. If we can show the numbers as he keeps them, the fee structures, the way the debt is calculated to never reduce, that's not just testimony, that's proof. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The ledger is in his office, he said. In the main house. I know where it is, she said. I watched Dix go in and out of that office 100 times. Another silence, longer this time. Eliza? His voice had shifted, not warning exactly, but something careful in it. I'm not suggesting we steal it, she said. I'm suggesting we get someone who is still inside that ranch to copy the relevant pages. She paused. Clara has been there 2 years. She knows that office. She knows Dix's schedule. He looked at her for a long time. You're not what I expected, he said. Not for the first time. I know, she said. You expected someone to rescue. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. I expected someone who needed time. I need time for some things, she said. Not for this. He nodded slowly. Then he reached for the paper and pen and started drafting the letter to Clara. They worked side by side at the kitchen table until the lamp burned low, and at some point, Buddy appeared in the doorway in his nightclothes, looked at them, made a sound of satisfaction, and went back to bed without a word. The letter went out with the Mexican trader 3 days later. They waited. The waiting was its own kind of work. The work of not acting, of holding the tension without letting it become either panic or passivity, of staying in motion on the things that could be moved, while leaving the things that couldn't be moved alone. Eliza stayed in motion. She moved through the ranch with the systematic focus of someone who has found her function and intends to execute it completely. The garden was producing now not lavishly, but steadily enough green on the table to make a difference. She had worked out the supply ordering to a precision that cut their monthly costs by roughly a fifth, which she showed Nathan in a 1-page summary, and which made him sit back in his chair and look at the ceiling for a moment, as if needing to recalibrate something. My father would say, he said, still looking at the ceiling, that I've been running this place half blind. You've been running it alone, she said. There's a difference. He looked at her. Is there? Yes. Half blind means you couldn't see. Running alone means nobody was there to show you the other half. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked back at the summary. The Henderson bull fees, he said. I know. I've been looking at the timeline. If we move the breeding cycle up 2 weeks, we'd catch the better grazing season, she finished. I calculated it last night. It works. This time the look lasted longer. Eliza, he said. Yes. What were you doing in Pennsylvania before this? She was quiet for a moment. Trying to be smaller than I was, she said. He set the paper down, very deliberately, like he was making sure his hands had somewhere to be before he spoke. Don't do that here, he said. She looked at him. Something in her chest pulled tight. I'm trying not to, she said. The reply from Clara came 11 days after they sent the letter, and it came not through the Mexican trader, but on horseback. A young man Eliza had never seen before, who identified himself as Clara's nephew, and whose arrival at the gate at 7 in the morning made both Nathan and Buddy appear on the porch before Eliza had finished reading the first line. She read it fast. Then she read it again. Then she looked up. He knows, she said. Both men went still. What does Clara say? Nathan asked. Thornton received a letter from a court clerk in Prescott last week. A routine inquiry, not the formal legal process, but a request for documentation regarding labor practices. She looked at the letter again. He knows someone filed a complaint. He doesn't know it's us yet. She paused. But Clara says he's been different since the letter came. She says he stopped being casual about the ledger. It's locked in the desk now. He's watching the workers more closely. Rosa, Nathan said immediately. Clara says Rosa is frightened. She says Rosa is thinking about running. Nathan said something under his breath that she didn't quite catch, but recognized as profane. He turned and went back inside. She followed. Buddy followed her. At the kitchen table, Nathan spread his hands flat and thought. She could watch him think it was one of the things she had learned to do to read the motion of his reasoning in the set of his jaw and the direction of his eyes and the quality of his stillness. If Rosa runs and they catch her again, she started. They'll make an example of her, Nathan said. Make the debt double again, maybe worse. Then we can't let her run unprepared. Eliza sat down across from him. Clara's nephew. How did he get here? Rides for a trading outfit, Buddy said from the doorway. Goes between the ranches. Can he get back to Clara with a message today? If he leaves in the hour, the young man said from the doorway where he was still standing hat in hand with the slightly stunned expression of someone who had arrived expecting to deliver a letter and instead stumbled into a war council. Good, Eliza said. She was already reaching for pen and paper. Then here is what we tell Clara. She wrote while she talked. She told Nathan the plan as it formed not as something fully realized, but as something she built in real time. And he caught the pieces she threw him and added to them and redirected 2 things and confirmed the rest. And by the time she was done writing the letter, they had something that was not perfect, but was executable and was faster than Thornton expected. The plan was this. Clara would not copy the ledger. Not now, with Thornton watching. Instead, she would copy 3 specific pages, the fee schedule on the inside front cover, which outlined the initial debt structure, and 2 pages that showed the pattern of debt adjustment. Just those. Small enough to fold inside a garment. She would get Rosa to agree not to run. She would wait for the Mexican trader's next circuit, which was in 4 days, and she would send the pages then. The young man left with the letter within the hour. Nathan stood on the porch watching him go. Eliza stood beside him. 4 days, she said. A lot can happen in 4 days, he said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to ride to Prescott again tomorrow. Talk to Whitfield directly. Tell him we need to move faster, that Thornton is already aware of the inquiry. What will Whitfield say? He'll say it's not enough yet. And what will you say? He turned to look at her. His eyes in the morning light were a color she had not paid particular attention to before. Not brown, not quite. Something darker and more complicated than that. The kind of color that required proximity to see correctly. I'll say that we don't need more evidence, he said. We need faster movement on what we already have. And that if the court doesn't move before Thornton does... He stopped. Then people get hurt, she said. Yes. She looked at him steadily. Then make them understand that. He held her gaze. You know, he said, most people who've been through what you've been through in the last 4 months. Most people aren't me, she said. Not with arrogance, just the same kind of plain factual certainty he used when he said things about himself. Something happened in his expression. Something she was not going to look at directly yet, because looking at it directly would require having a conversation she was not ready to have. "No," he said quietly. "They're not." He rode to Prescott the next morning. He came back 2 days later, not one. She heard the horse in the yard at an odd hour mid-afternoon when she was in the garden, and something in the sound of it, the pace of it, made her stand up and turn before he'd even dismounted. His face told her something had happened. "Inside," he said, not unkindly, but with the particular compression of a man carrying something that needs to be put down on a table before it can be properly dealt with. She went inside. Buddy appeared from somewhere because Buddy always appeared when things were happening, which was one of the things she had come to rely on. Nathan sat. He put a folded document on the table. "Whitfield showed me this," he said. "It arrived at the clerk's office yesterday. It's a counterfiling from Thornton." She picked it up. She read it. The room felt smaller. Thornton had filed a civil complaint claiming that Nathan Cole had engaged in fraudulent acquisition of a labor contract, specifically that he had misrepresented his intentions and obtained Eliza's contract under false business pretenses, and that therefore the contract remained legally enforceable by the original party. He was also claiming that Eliza Harper had breached her contract by leaving the property without fulfilling the debt obligation, and that she looked at the number she owed 3 times the original figure, inflated with additional penalties for abandonment. And then she got to the last paragraph. She read it twice. "He's asking the court to compel my return to the ranch," she said. Her voice came out very flat. "Yes," Nathan said. "On the basis that I am still under his contractual authority." "Yes." She set the document down. She sat very still for a moment. Then something happened in her that was not panic and was not despair, and was not the particular helpless fear she had felt on the floor of Thornton's yard. It was something harder than those things. Something that had been built slowly over weeks of recovery and work, and being told by a man she trusted that her mind and her capability were not liabilities, but assets, that she was not a debt, but a person. She picked the document back up. She read it again more slowly this time. "He's overreached," she said. Nathan looked at her. "Look at the filing date," she said. She put it on the table and pointed. "He filed this the day after the inquiry letter from Whitfield arrived, which means he moved in panic, not strategy." She looked up. "A strategic man would have waited, would have built a counter case quietly. He moved immediately, which means he's frightened." She paused. "And he's claiming the contract is still enforceable. But if that contract is before the court, then the court gets to examine the contract terms," Nathan said slowly. "Which is exactly what we wanted." She held his gaze. "He's handed us the mechanism. By trying to use the court to retrieve me, he's put his own contract under judicial review." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then Buddy from the doorway said, "Well, I'll be damned." Nathan sat back in his chair. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen from him before. Not the focused look, not the careful look. Something more open than either of those. Something that looked like awe a little. Like a man who has just seen something he didn't know was possible. "Can you write up the argument," he said, "what you just said, in legal language, the way Whitfield would need to see it?" "Give me an hour," she said. She had it done in 45 minutes. Nathan rode back to Prescott the next morning. The 3 days he was gone were the longest 3 days Eliza had spent at the ranch. Not because she was idle, she was not idle, she could not be idle, but because the stakes had become visible in a way that pressed on everything. Thornton knew where she was now. His filing named Nathan's ranch. She was not hidden anymore. On the second day, she found herself checking the gate 3 times in one afternoon, for no reason she could clearly articulate. On the second evening, she sat with Buddy on the porch after supper, and he said without looking at her, "He'll be fine." "I know," she said. He's been through worse than a court filing. She looked at him. What has he been through? Buddy was quiet for a long time. She had learned that his long pauses meant he was deciding something, not stalling. He had a wife, Buddy said. 7 years ago, when he first came out here. Another pause. Good woman, strong, knew her own mind like you do. He picked at a loose thread on his cuff. She died in the 3rd year. Fever. Took their daughter too. She was 18 months old. Eliza did not speak. He built this ranch in the year after, Buddy said. I think he needed something to do with his hands, something to make that wasn't going to leave. He paused. He doesn't talk about them, but the photograph on the mantel. I know, she said quietly. She had understood what the photograph was without looking at it closely. She had made a deliberate choice not to look at it closely. He's been careful ever since, Buddy said. About everything. About letting things matter. He finally turned and looked at her directly. Until recently. She looked at her hands. Buddy, she said carefully. I'm 62 years old and mostly deaf in one ear, he said. I ain't subtle and I ain't got the time for it. I'm just telling you what I see. She was quiet for a long moment. The night around them was warm and full of the sound of the desert. I don't know what I'm doing, she said finally. Honestly, I came here to survive, and I'm surviving. And something else is happening that I don't have a map for it. Nobody does, Buddy said. That's the point. Nathan came back on the 3rd day with James Whitfield. Not a letter. Not a message. The man himself, compact 50s, with the air of someone who has spent decades in legal proceedings and has long since stopped being surprised by human behavior, but was surprised now and letting it show slightly. He rode into the yard with Nathan just before noon and dismounted and shook Eliza's hand with the focused energy of a man who has just read something that changed his understanding of a case. Miss Harper, he said. The argument you wrote. Mr. Whitfield. I showed it to Judge Cross last night. He paused. Cross wants to move on this within 2 weeks. He's calling a formal hearing. Both parties required to present. He looked at her steadily. That means Thornton will be there, and it means you'll need to speak. She had expected this. She had thought about it in the long nights. I know, she said. You understand what that means. Standing up in front of a territorial court and, I understand, she said. I've been preparing. Whitfield looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at him with an expression that said, I told you. We're also going to need your witnesses, Whitfield said, turning back to Eliza. Clara, Rosa, anyone else from Thornton's operation who can speak to the labor conditions. I've already reached out to Clara, she said. She's ready. And Rosa, a pause. Rosa is frightened, understandably. But her testimony about the retrieval being brought back forcibly after attempting to leave, that's the clearest evidence of unlawful confinement we have. I know. Eliza looked at Nathan. He met her eyes. Something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. Let me write to Rosa, she said. Not through Clara this time, directly. I'll explain what the hearing means, what her testimony would change not just for herself, but for the women Thornton hasn't hired yet, the ones he's going to trap in the same system next year if we don't stop him now. Whitfield nodded. Do it today. Already at the table, she said, and turned and went inside. She heard Whitfield say to Nathan behind her, Where did you find her? And Nathan's voice quiet and certain. She found herself. I just got out of the way. The letter to Rosa took an hour. She wrote it and rewrote it because the first version was too logical, all argument and reasoning. And Rosa didn't need logic. Rosa needed to feel that someone understood what she was being asked to risk. So Eliza wrote the second version differently. She wrote about the floor of Thornton's yard, about the flour sack on her back, about the moment she had thought I will not cry and made it true, about riding away in the dark with a man she didn't know and not knowing whether she was going from one prison to another. And she wrote, "I know what it feels like to believe that surviving quietly is the best you can do. I thought that too. But Rosa quiet survival keeps his doors open for the next woman, and the one after her. You are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for every woman who signs a paper like ours, because she believes the promise written on it." She folded the letter. She sat for a moment with it in her hands. Then she thought about something Buddy had said, a river changing course. Slow to start. Then nothing's going to stop it. She had not started out trying to stop Caleb Thornton. She had started out trying to survive. But survival had given way to recovery, and recovery had given way to strength, and strength had given way to this. To Whitfield at the table. And a hearing in 2 weeks. And a letter to a frightened 19-year-old girl that she was going to send because it was the right thing to do. She looked up and found Nathan in the doorway. He'd been there for a while, she thought, just watching. "Ready," he said. She looked at the letter, then at him. "One more thing," she said. She picked up the pen and added one line to the bottom of the letter. She showed it to Nathan. He read it. "You are not the debt they say you are. You never were." He looked up from the page. His expression was the most open she had ever seen it, unguarded in a way she recognized as rare for him, the way a door that usually stays closed might be found just once standing open. "Send it," he said. She handed it to the rider waiting in the yard. Then she stood on the porch of Nathan Cole's small mountain ranch and watched the rider disappear down the trail to the south, carrying words she had written to a girl she barely knew about. A fight that had grown beyond anything she had expected when she climbed onto that horse 3 months ago, and rode away from a man who had put a flour sack on her back and told the world she was too weak to matter. She didn't feel weak. She hadn't felt weak in weeks. What she felt standing on that porch in the afternoon light with Nathan Cole a foot behind her, and the sound of Whitfield's voice in the kitchen going over court procedure, and Buddy somewhere rattling pots, because it was coming on supper time, what she felt was something she could not fully name yet. But it was large, and it was not going away. And 2 weeks from now she was going to walk into a territorial courtroom and say out loud and on the record everything she had survived. Everything that had been done to her. Everything that had been taken. Everything she had nonetheless managed to hold on to. And Caleb Thornton was going to be sitting across that room. And she was not afraid. She turned around. Nathan was right there, closer than she had realized. Close enough that she could see the color in his eyes correctly. Not brown, not quite something darker and more complicated and steady as anything she had ever looked at. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "That I have never in my life," she said, "been so certain of something I haven't done yet." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "Good," he said. And he said it like a man who has been waiting for a very long time for exactly that. The 2 weeks before the hearing did not pass slowly. They passed the way 2 weeks pass when every day inside them matters fast on the surface and waited underneath each morning, arriving before you were quite ready for it, and each evening ending before you had finished what needed doing. Eliza worked. She always worked when she needed to think, and she needed to think constantly now, so she worked constantly, and the ranch had never been in better shape. And Nathan watched her move through it, with the quiet attention of a man who has learned that observation is sometimes the most honest form of care. Rosa's answer came 6 days before the hearing. It came through the Mexican trader again, tucked inside a folded piece of cloth, a small, careful letter in the handwriting of a 19-year-old who had learned to write in childhood and hadn't practiced much since. The spelling was imperfect. The grammar moved in its own direction. But the words were absolutely clear. "I will come. Tell me where and when. I am not going to be quiet anymore." Eliza read it standing at the gate where the trader had handed it to her, and something happened in her face that she didn't try to control. Nathan saw it from the porch. He didn't ask. He just walked over and held out his hand, and she gave him the letter, and he read it. And when he handed it back, his jaw was set in the way it got when something had moved him that he wasn't going to say anything about. "Whitfield needs to know today," she said. "I'll ride. I'll come with you." He looked at her. It was the first time she had asked to ride to Prescott with him. She had stayed at the ranch on the previous 2 trips, managing, preparing, holding the structure of what they were building together from that end. He seemed to understand that this was different, that something had shifted in her since Rosa's letter arrived, that she needed to be in motion toward the thing rather than waiting for it to arrive. "Be ready in 20 minutes, he said. She was ready in 10. They rode to Prescott side by side, and the trail that had seemed long and strange the first night she had ridden it in the dark was different now, familiar in the way a road becomes familiar, not because it has changed, but because you have. She knew the turns. She knew where the trail narrowed. She knew the particular quality of light on the canyon walls at midday. She knew she was not riding away from something anymore. She was riding toward it. Whitfield received them in his office, which was a narrow room stacked to the ceiling with paper, and possessed of the particular organized chaos of a man who knows exactly where everything is, and has never needed anyone else to navigate it. He read Rosa's letter. He read it again. Then he looked up over his spectacles with an expression that was professional satisfaction barely kept in check. "That's 3 witnesses," he said. "Clara Rosa, and Miss Harper herself, and the ledger pages," Eliza said. "Clara's pages came through yesterday." She produced them from inside her jacket. Whitfield took them with both hands, handling them the way a man handles something he has been waiting for. He spread them on his desk and studied them. "Front cover fee schedule," he said, "and the adjustment pages." "The adjustment mechanism is on the 2nd page," Eliza said. "The formula that determines how fees accumulate. That formula makes it mathematically impossible for a worker to reduce their debt under normal working conditions. The debt grows faster than any credited wage." Whitfield looked up. "You can demonstrate that mathematically." "I already have," she said. She reached back into her jacket and produced 2 more folded pages. "I've calculated the debt reduction rate against the fee accumulation rate for 3 separate workers, including myself. Under the contract terms, none of us could have worked off the debt in under 4 years. The original promised timeline was 8 months. Whitfield took the pages. He looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing, but the expression on his face said, "I know. I know." "Miss Harper," Whitfield said, "have you ever considered law?" "I've considered a great many things," she said evenly. "Right now I'm considering winning this hearing." Whitfield set everything down in a neat stack. "Cross has scheduled for 9 o'clock Thursday morning. Thornton will be there with his own representation, a man named Garfield from Flagstaff. Decent lawyer, not exceptional. You'll need to be prepared for him to challenge your characterization of the contract terms. He'll argue that the fees were disclosed and agreed to." "They were disclosed," Eliza said. "They were not explained. There is a difference, and I can speak to it directly." "He'll also attack your credibility," Whitfield said. "Your circumstances, the fact that you left the contracted property in the company of a man." The room went very quiet. Nathan moved. It was a small movement, just a shift of weight, a slight forward lean, but she felt it as clearly as if he had spoken. "Let him," she said. "Let him stand in front of Judge Cross and tell the court that a woman who left a property where she had been publicly humiliated and denied basic medical care had compromised her credibility by accepting help from someone who offered it." She paused. "I welcome that argument." Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. "Thursday," he said. 9 o'clock. Don't be late." They rode back in the late afternoon, and Eliza did not speak for the first several miles because she was running the hearing in her head, not with fear, but with the focused, systematic energy she brought to every problem, playing out the arguments and the counter-arguments, and the moments where she would need to be still, and the moments where she would need to speak. Nathan rode beside her and let her think. That was one of the things about him she had come to depend on, without realizing she was depending on it, his ability to recognize when silence was the most useful thing he could offer. After a while she said, "He's going to try to make me look like a runaway." "Yes," Nathan said. "He's going to imply that you and I," She stopped. Started again. He's going to try to make this about something other than what it is. Yes, Nathan said again. Same tone, steady. She looked at him. The trail was wide here enough for comfortable side-by-side riding, and in the afternoon light she could see his face clearly. He was looking ahead. The set of his jaw was the set she recognized, the one that meant he had already thought about this, had already decided something, and was waiting for her to arrive at whatever the question was so he could answer it honestly. "Does that bother you?" she said. "What people will say about why you took me on." He turned and looked at her. Direct, unhurried, the way he looked at everything that mattered to him. "No," he said, simply. "It might affect your standing in the territory, your business relationships. If people think, Eliza," he said her name the way he sometimes did not, to stop her, but to bring her back to the center of something. "I know why I did what I did. You know why I did what I did." A pause. "What other people think about it is their business, not mine." She held his gaze for a moment. "You're remarkably uncomplicated," she said, for someone so complicated. Something shifted in his expression. That movement she had come to recognize, the one that almost became a smile. "I'm going to take that as a compliment," he said. "It was one," she said, and looked back at the trail. They rode in silence for another mile, the comfortable kind. Then Nathan said, "I want to say something." She waited. "Before Thursday," he said. "Because Thursday is going to be a great deal is going to happen Thursday. And I want to say this before it does so it doesn't get mixed up with everything else." She kept her eyes on the trail, but her full attention was on him. "When I rode to Thornton's ranch that morning," he said, "I went because I had cattle to buy. That's the truth." He paused. "What happened after what I didn't plan that. I saw you on the ground, and I saw him stand over you, and I made a decision that took about 30 seconds. Another pause. "I need you to know that it had nothing to do with you owing me anything. It never did." "I know that," she said, "but I also need you to know." He stopped. Started again. "What's happened here since you came? What you've done with this place? What you've done with me, if I'm being honest?" He paused for a long time. "I didn't expect that. I wasn't prepared for it." She did not trust herself to speak immediately. "Nathan," she said after a moment. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." She looked at him. He was looking at her now too. Both of them at pace on the trail with the canyon walls around them and the late light coming in at an angle that made everything sharp and clear. "I came here expecting a prison," she said. "I found something I don't have a name for yet. And I don't—" She paused carefully. "I don't say things I don't mean. So when I tell you that what's happened here matters to me, it matters to me completely. I need you to understand that I'm not saying it because I think I should, or because I'm grateful, or because I don't have anywhere else to go." He was very still. "I know," he said, quietly, like a man receiving something he has been careful not to hope for. "Good," she said. They rode the last 3 miles home without speaking, and the silence between them was different from any silence that had preceded it. Not the silence of two people who don't know what to say, but the silence of two people who have said exactly what needed saying, and are now simply existing in the same space, and finding that the space has changed shape. Buddy was on the porch when they rode in. He looked at them. At both of them. At the particular quality of the air between them. He said nothing. He just nodded once slowly with the expression of a man whose read on a situation has been confirmed, and went inside. The 2 days before the hearing were preparation. Pure, focused, relentless preparation. Eliza rehearsed her testimony in the kitchen with Nathan asking her the questions that Garfield Thornton's lawyer was likely to ask. He was good at it, better than she expected, because he understood strategy, and he understood Thornton, and he pushed her on the things that could be pushed. "He'll say you were a voluntary signatory to the contract." Nathan said, in the flat, slightly clipped voice he used when he was playing the opposing counsel. "I was," she said. "I signed it. I also signed it based on materially false representations made by the recruiting agent who was operating under Thornton's financial arrangement. A signature obtained through fraud is not legally binding." He'll argue you can't prove Fitch was acting on Thornton's behalf. He shared commissions with Thornton on every worker placed. The ledger pages show a recurring line item labeled placement fees that correlates exactly with new worker arrivals. That is a financial relationship. Nathan paused. "You found that in the ledger pages Clara sent?" "Page 2, third column," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Garfield is not going to know what hit him," he said in his own voice. "Good," she said. "Keep going." He kept going. They worked until late that night, and Buddy fell asleep in his chair in the corner and started snoring gently, and neither of them commented on it, just lowered their voices slightly and kept going. At some point after midnight, Nathan said, "Enough." She looked up from the notes. "You know this," he said. "You know it better than you know your own name. If you rehearse it anymore, you'll be reciting instead of speaking, and reciting won't reach cross the way speaking will." She sat back, let out a breath. "You're right," she said. "Get some sleep," he said. She stood. She gathered her notes. She stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, the same way she had stopped in so many doorways of this house in the months she had been here, turning back because something wasn't finished yet. "Nathan," she said. He looked up from the table. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. For all of this." A pause. "I know I've said it before. I mean it more now." He held her gaze. "Come home safe on Thursday," he said. "That's all I want." She nodded and went to bed. And this time, she slept. Thursday morning arrived with the particular clarity of a day that knows it matters. They rode to Prescott in a group: Nathan Eliza Whitfield, who had ridden out to meet them at the edge of town, and Buddy, who had announced at breakfast that he was coming and that no one should bother arguing with him about it. No one had. The territorial courthouse in Prescott was a low adobe building that held itself with more authority than its size suggested, the way certain rooms do when they have witnessed enough human consequence to accumulate a kind of weight. Eliza walked in with her back straight and her hands steady and her notes inside her jacket, and she did not look around the room for Thornton. But she felt him before she saw him, that particular quality of presence that belongs to men who have spent decades assuming the room belongs to them. He was at the opposite table, larger than she remembered. Or maybe she was just seeing him differently now, without the particular distortion that fear applies to people who hold power over you. He looked older. He looked like a man who had received an unwelcome surprise and was managing it with the careful composure of someone unaccustomed to needing to manage anything. Garfield, his lawyer, was a thin man with a precise mustache and the kind of organized stillness that said, "I have done this many times and I am not worried." He looked at Eliza once as she took her seat, assessed her with professional speed, and looked away. She noted that. Clara came in with Rosa 10 minutes before 9. Eliza had not seen either of them since she had left Thornton's ranch, and the sight of them, Clara still carrying herself with that careful, compressed dignity. Rosa, smaller than Eliza, had remembered younger looking, with eyes that were frightened but determined. Did something in her chest that she held together by breathing slowly and deliberately. She stood. She crossed to them. Clara took her hand. Held it. "You look better," Clara said. "Just that." "I am better," Eliza said. Rosa looked at her. 19 years old, with everything she was afraid of sitting across the room from her. "I'm scared," Rosa said quietly. "I know," Eliza said. "So am I." She kept Rosa's gaze. "But I'm going to be right here the whole time. And what you say today, it's going to mean something that outlasts this room." Rosa looked at the table where Thornton sat. Then she looked back at Eliza. "Okay," she said. Thin voice, but steady. Judge Harlan Cross entered at 9 o'clock precisely, and the room stood, And when they sat again, the quality of the air had changed, compressed, formal, weighted with the specific gravity of official process. Cross was in his 60s, heavy-set with a face that had developed over decades into an expression of permanent impartial evaluation. He looked at both tables with the same flat measuring attention. "We're here regarding the matter of Thornton versus Cole and Harper," he said. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings from both parties. Before we proceed, I want to be clear about what this hearing will and will not determine." He spoke for 3 minutes about procedure. Eliza listened to every word. Beside her, Whitfield had his papers arranged in the precise order she had watched him organize 3 times on the ride in. Nathan was in the gallery, which was where the rules put him, not at the table, not able to speak, but there. She had looked for him before she sat down. She had found him immediately. He was in the 3rd row, hat in his hands, watching her with the focused, steady attention he brought to things that mattered to him. She had not needed to look at him again, but it helped to know he was there. Garfield opened for Thornton's side with the professional confidence of a man who has tried cases for 20 years and considers this one manageable. He laid out the argument cleanly. Miss Harper had signed a voluntary contract, had received transportation, housing, and food in exchange for labor, had failed to complete her obligations, and had been removed from the property by a party who had obtained her contract under misrepresented business intent. He was calm. He was organized. He was in complete control of his narrative. He had not yet seen Eliza's math. Whitfield opened for their side with the ledger pages and the fee schedule. He walked Cross through the debt accumulation formula. He used Eliza's calculations. Her clean, precise tables showing the debt trajectory against the credited wage rate, and he laid them on the court record, 1 page at a time, slowly letting each one settle before moving to the next. Garfield's calm developed a small crack somewhere around the 3rd page. Cross asked 3 questions. They were good questions. Whitfield answered 2 of them and deferred the 3rd to the witness he was about to call. "Your Honor," Whitfield said, "I'd like to call Miss Eliza Harper." She stood. She walked to the front of the room. She did not look at Thornton. She sat, and she looked at Cross, and she began. She had rehearsed this. She knew it. But Nathan had been right about the difference between reciting and speaking, and what came out of her was not the rehearsed version, but something that carried the rehearsed structure while being alive in a way that rehearsed things rarely are. She spoke about Pennsylvania and Gerald Fitch and the contract she had signed. She spoke about the ledger and the fees, and the morning she had finally understood that the math was designed to keep her there indefinitely. She spoke about the day she collapsed in the yard, and she spoke about it plainly without drama in the flat, factual voice of someone describing something that happened and not asking anyone to feel a particular way about it. And then Garfield cross-examined her. He started with the signature. She acknowledged it. He moved to the disclosure of fees. She acknowledged it, then explained precisely, and without raising her voice, the distinction between disclosure and explanation, and the specific ways in which the fee structure had been misrepresented in the recruitment conversation. He tried to make something of her departure with Nathan. He phrased it carefully, the phrasing of a lawyer who wants the implication without the liability of the direct statement. She looked at him. "Are you suggesting," she said, "that accepting the assistance of someone who offered to remove me from conditions of unlawful confinement reflects poorly on my character?" A beat of silence. "I'm suggesting that the circumstances of your departure, the circumstances of my departure," she said, still completely level, "were that I was physically ill, had not been paid in 3 months, was being held in debt peonage under a fraudulently induced contract, and a man with basic human decency offered me a way out." She paused 1 beat. "If the court has questions about my character, I invite them. If counsel wants to characterize kindness as something other than kindness, he is welcome to make that argument to Judge Cross." Garfield moved on. He did not return to that line of questioning. Clara testified. Her testimony was quiet, careful, delivered in the compressed manner of a woman who has learned to take up as little space as possible, and it was, for that reason, more devastating than anything theatrical could have been. She described 2 years. She described the ledger. She described watching Eliza collapse in the yard. Then she said simply, "He put the sack on her back while she was still on the ground." The room went very still. Cross made a note. Rosa testified last. She was visibly frightened. Her hands folded on the table in front of her were not entirely steady, but her voice when she spoke was clear. She described her attempted departure. She described the 2 men Thornton had sent to bring her back. She described the doubling of her debt, the written notice delivered to her in front of the other workers, the words that accompanied it. "What did he say to you?" Whitfield asked, "when they brought you back?" Rosa looked at Thornton for the first time since she had sat down. She looked at him with 19 years of fear behind her eyes and something new in front of it. He said, she told the room, "Now you understand that you don't leave until I say you leave." Garfield made an objection about hearsay. Cross overruled it without looking up from his notes. And then it was Thornton's turn. He took the witness position with the ease of a man who has never seriously considered the possibility that things might not go his way. He was smooth. He was confident. He had good answers for everything Whitfield asked him. And his good answers all had the same quality, technically plausible, carefully constructed, designed to walk up to the line of the provable without crossing it. He was, Eliza had to admit, a skilled liar. And then Whitfield asked him about Gerald Fitch. "Your relationship to the recruitment agent who supplied your labor contracts," Whitfield said. "Can you describe the nature of that arrangement?" Thornton described it. "Agency relationship, commission on placements, standard business practice. And the placement commission," Whitfield said, "was paid to Mr. Fitch from funds managed by your operation." "That's standard for agency arrangements, yes." "And that commission," Whitfield said, "appears in your own ledger as a line item." Thornton paused. "One beat too long. I'd have to review the specific ledger entry. Page 1. Whitfield said 3rd column, labeled Placement Commission Fitch Agency, dated on the arrival date of each new worker." He paused. "The dates match the arrival records exactly." Another pause. Longer. "Those records would need to be reviewed in context. They were part of the pages submitted to this court this morning," Whitfield said. "The court already has them." Garfield said something at the table. Thornton looked at Garfield. Garfield made a small controlled gesture that said, "Leave it." Thornton left it. But the room had felt the pause. Cross had felt the pause. Eliza, watching from her seat, had watched Cross make a note at the exact moment the pause happened, and she knew what that note was for. Closing arguments were brief. Whitfield was precise and clean, and built his closing on the math, the beautiful, irrefutable math that showed the debt structure for exactly what it was. Garfield was forceful and professional, and argued consent and voluntary agreement with everything he had. Cross recessed for 1 hour. Eliza sat in the hallway with Clara on one side and Rosa on the other, and Nathan across from her, and nobody talked much. There wasn't much to say. Either Cross saw it or he didn't. Either the math was enough or it wasn't. Either the law was what it claimed to be in this territory on this day for these women, or it wasn't. She had done everything she could. Nathan looked at her across the hall. She looked back. He held her gaze with steady, complete certainty, the look of a man who does not promise things he cannot control, but is telling her without words that whatever comes through that door in an hour, she does not face it alone. She breathed. The hour passed. Cross returned. The room stood. Cross sat. He looked at both tables. He looked at his notes. He looked up. In the matter of the contractual arrangement between the Thornton Ranch operation and its labor workers, he said, in the measured, deliberate cadence of a man who chooses every word in a formal pronouncement. This court finds that the debt accumulation structure embedded in the standard contract form, as documented in evidence submitted by the plaintiff's counsel, constitutes an instrument of fraudulent inducement under territorial labor law. The debt claimed against the departing workers is therefore uncollectible, unenforceable, and void. Garfield's pen stopped moving. Furthermore, Cross continued, This court finds sufficient evidence of unlawful labor confinement to refer this matter to the Territorial Prosecutor's Office for criminal review. Thornton turned to Garfield. Garfield was already writing something. The counter-complaint filed against Nathan Cole and Eliza Harper is dismissed, Cross said. The contracts in question are void. The workers bound under them are free of all claimed obligation. He set down his papers. This court will also be issuing a formal notice to the Fitch Placement Agency in Pennsylvania regarding their role in these arrangements. He stood. The room stood. He walked out. The sound that followed the breaking of the held breath of the entire room was not applause. It was something quieter and more real than applause. It was the sound of three women exhaling at the same moment. Clara's hand found Eliza's. Rosa made a sound, small, high, barely audible, that was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, and was exactly what 19 years old and free feels like when you have not been free for a long time. Eliza held both their hands and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly, deliberately, through everything that was moving in her because she was not going to cry in the Prescott Territorial Courthouse. She had decided that. She was going to be steady and present and clear. And she was going to be that until she was somewhere private enough to not be. She looked across the room. Ross. Thornton was standing with Garfield, receiving something from him in low, urgent sentences. His face had changed. The comfortable authority was gone from it, not replaced by defeat exactly, but by something more unsettled and less recognizable. He looked like a man in a room that no longer belonged to him. Their eyes met. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he looked away. She looked away too because she did not need it. She had not come here to see him diminished. She had come here to be free, and she was free, and those were not the same thing. Nathan appeared at her side. She had not seen him cross the room. He was simply there the way he often simply was, without announcement or ceremony present, when she needed him in the uncanny way that people who pay close attention to each other can sometimes be. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood beside her. After a moment, she said quietly, "We did it." "You did it," he said. She turned to look at him. "We." He held her gaze. And that shift happened in his face, not the almost smile this time. The full thing, real and unguarded, and more affecting than she had been prepared for, because she had not seen it before. And it changed the whole architecture of him. "We," he agreed. "And she thought there is the rest of my life standing right there." She did not say that, but she thought it completely, and with the same unshakable certainty with which she had told him 2 weeks ago on the porch of his ranch, "I have never in my life been so certain of something I haven't done yet." She was certain of this. They rode home in the late afternoon, the four of them, Nathan, Eliza, Buddy, and Whitfield, who had decided to make the ride back as far as the Fork before turning south toward his own house. The first several miles, nobody said much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because what had happened in that courtroom was still settling, still finding its shape inside each of them, and speaking too soon would have been like picking up something that needed more time to set. Rosa and Clara had stayed in Prescott for the night at a boarding house Whitfield had arranged. Rosa had family in Tucson she had not seen in 8 months, and arrangements were being made. Clara had not yet said what she was going to do. When Eliza had asked her standing in the corridor outside the courtroom with the sound of Prescott going about its afternoon, still strange and ordinary around them, Clara had looked at her for a long moment and said, "I don't know yet. I haven't been allowed to not know something for 2 years. I'm going to sit with it." Eliza had understood that completely. It was Buddy who broke the silence on the trail home. He did it the way he did most things, without ceremony, in the middle of something else, as if the words had been waiting and had simply found a convenient exit. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I've been sitting on that courthouse bench for 3 hours, and I want it known that those benches are an absolute disgrace, and somebody in the territorial government ought to be ashamed of themselves." Nathan said nothing. But Eliza heard it, the breath that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one she had heard from him all day. She felt the tension in her own chest release by exactly 1 degree. "Buddy," she said. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming." He looked straight ahead at the trail. Wasn't going to miss it, he said. Whitfield peeled off at the fork with a handshake for Nathan and a formal nod for Eliza that carried more genuine respect in it than most handshakes she had received in her life. "I'll be in touch regarding the prosecutor's referral," he said. "Thornton isn't finished with the legal system yet. He's just finished with you." "Good," she said. And then there were 3 of them on the trail, and the canyon walls were going amber and rose around them in the way they did at this hour. And Eliza let herself look at it for the first time in weeks without the weight of what was coming, sitting on top of everything she saw. It was beautiful. She had almost forgotten that it was. They came into the yard as the last light was going, and Buddy dismounted and took all 3 horses without being asked, making the small sounds he made when he was managing animals, not quite talking to them, not quite not, and Nathan and Eliza walked toward the house side by side, and neither of them went in immediately. They stood on the porch. The desert at dusk made its own sounds. Not silence exactly, but the particular quality of a landscape settling into night insects, beginning the temperature dropping fast the way it did out here. "I keep thinking about the moment he looked away," Eliza said. Nathan glanced at her. "Thornton," she said. "In the courtroom, when our eyes met, he looked away first." She paused. "I didn't expect that to matter as much as it did." Why did it matter? She thought about it. "Because the last time he looked at me," she said, "I was on the ground and he was standing over me, and he didn't look away then, he held it." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't realize I was still carrying that image until I saw it replaced." Nathan was quiet beside her. "Is it replaced now?" he asked. "Yes," she said, simply, completely. He nodded once, then, "Come inside. You need to eat something. You haven't eaten since this morning." "You've been tracking my food consumption again." "Buddy reports everything," he said, "including nothing." She went inside. Buddy had somehow, in the time it took them to stand on the porch, already started a fire and put something on the stove that smelled like the beans and cornbread combination that had been the first thing she had eaten in this house all those months ago. She suspected he had done that deliberately. She loved him for it. She sat at the kitchen table and watched Nathan move through the kitchen with the ease of a man in his own space, and thought about how different it looked to her now than it had that first night. Same table, same shelves, same fireplace, completely transformed by everything that had happened in the space between then and now. Not the room. Her. She had been transformed, and the room had stayed the same, which was how she could tell. "Nathan," she said. He turned from the stove. "I need to say something," she said. "While I still have the while, everything is clear." He came to the table and sat down across from her. He left his hands loose on the table, unheld open. The way he sat when he was ready to receive something without trying to shape it. "I came here with nothing," she said. "I don't mean the bag and the lack of money. I mean I had been told and had started to believe that I was the problem. That being who I am, the way I think, the way I see things, that those were the things that had gotten me into trouble. That if I had been smaller, more manageable, less—" She stopped, started again. "Thornton called me weak, but what he actually couldn't stand was that I wasn't. And I had started to wonder if maybe he was right about me in some other way that I couldn't see." Nathan was watching her steadily. "You showed me he was wrong," she said. "Not by telling me. By just treating what I am as something useful. Something worth having around. Something that didn't need to be managed or diminished." She held his gaze. "I don't know how to account for what that's done for me. I don't have the right words for it, but I needed you to know that it happened, that you did that." The fire shifted behind him. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not speak, might just nod the way he sometimes did when words felt insufficient. But then he said in his quiet, unhurried way, "The photograph on the mantel." She went still. "Her name was Mary," he said. "My wife. She died 7 years ago in the spring. Our daughter, we called her Beth. She was 18 months. He said it plainly, the way he said things he had said to himself so many times that the words had been worn smooth. "I know," Eliza said gently. "Buddy told me." He nodded. He had suspected as much she could see. After they died, he said, I built this ranch. I told myself it was enough, that work was enough, that Buddy and the cattle and the fences were enough. He paused. I got very good at believing that, for a long time. She didn't speak. And then, he said, I rode into Thornton's yard to buy cattle, and I saw a woman trying to get up off the ground with a flour sack on her back, and I made a decision in 30 seconds. He looked at her. I told you it had nothing to do with you owing me anything. That's true. But I didn't tell you the whole truth, because I didn't know how to yet. She waited. The whole truth, he said, is that I was afraid. I have been afraid since Mary died of exactly this, of someone mattering, of building something with a person again. He kept her gaze steady, entirely open, in a way she had never seen him entirely open before. And I helped you anyway, because you were on the ground, and it was wrong, and I could do something about it. He paused. And then you came here, and you fixed my garden, and found my billing errors, and memorized my contract, and changed everything in this house, without once making me feel like it was being taken from me. He stopped. You didn't take anything, Eliza. You added to it, all of it, including me. She had promised herself she was not going to cry today. She had made it through Prescott on that promise. It turned out the promise had a limit. She pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth one sharp moment, and then she brought it down, and kept his gaze and said, You are the first person who ever looked at what I am and didn't try to make it less. I know, he said. I can't imagine why anyone would. She laughed. It came out slightly broken at the edges, but it was real. You say things like that, she said, as if they're obvious. They are obvious, he said. Nathan. Eliza. I want to stay, she said. Not because I don't have anywhere to go, because this is where I want to be. He looked at her for a long moment, across the kitchen table, in the firelight in the house, that was different than it had been because she was in it. Then stay, he said. Buddy appeared in the doorway with a pot and 2 bowls, and the expression of a man who has been listening through the wall for the last 5 minutes and has no intention of pretending otherwise. Beans are done, he announced. Nathan did not look away from Eliza. Thank you, Buddy, he said. You're welcome, Buddy said, setting everything on the table with considerable satisfaction. I'm going to eat mine on the porch. He picked his bowl back up. Privately, he went out. The door closed behind him with the specific firmness of a man making a statement. Eliza looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Eliza. And in spite of everything, in spite of the courtroom, and the testimony, and the 7 years, and the flour sack, and the 30-second decision, and all the miles, and all the months, she started to laugh, really laugh, and after a moment, so did he, quiet and real, and it filled the kitchen, the way warmth fills a room, and it was the most ordinary and the most extraordinary thing that had happened in that house in a very long time. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Territorial Prosecutor's Office opened a formal criminal investigation into Caleb Thornton's labor practices. Eliza found out through Whitfield's letter, which arrived on a Tuesday morning while she was in the garden. She read it, standing up, soil on her hands, and stood very still for a moment when she finished. Then she walked to where Nathan was repairing the north fence and handed it to him without a word. He read it. He handed it back. It's not finished yet, she said. It could take months. He has money and lawyers and... I know, Nathan said. And there are still women at that ranch, until it actually... Eliza. She stopped. One thing at a time, he said. Today, this is enough. She looked at the letter, at the formal language of official process beginning to move in the direction of justice, slowly and imperfectly and bureaucratically, but genuinely moving. Okay, she said. Today this is enough. But it wasn't the end of it for her, and Nathan knew it, which was why he didn't tell her to let it go. Letting things go was not something Eliza Harper did with injustice she could still do something about. What she did instead was write letters, testimony summaries, a detailed account of the Fitch Agency's recruitment practices that Whitfield forwarded to a colleague in Philadelphia with connections to the State Labor Board. She wrote to the other women she had heard about secondhand through Clara's network, through the Mexican trader's expanding usefulness as an information courier. She wrote clearly, and she wrote persistently, and she kept records of everything she sent and everything she received. Nathan built her a desk. He did it without announcement. She came in from the garden one afternoon to find it in the corner of the kitchen where the extra chair had been solid and level and made from good wood with a shelf above it for her papers and a small drawer that pulled smoothly. She stood and looked at it for a long time. "The chair was taking up space," he said from across the room, not looking up from what he was doing. She touched the edge of the desk. The wood was smooth. He had sanded it carefully. "Nathan," she said. This is a very good desk." "It's a decent desk," he said. "You'll tell me if it needs adjusting." She pulled out the chair and sat down and put her hands flat on the surface of it. The desk was exactly the right height. She did not ask him how he had known the right height. She suspected he had been paying attention to how she sat at the kitchen table for weeks and had simply built accordingly. That was who he was. She started writing. The months after the hearing had their own rhythm different from the months before, less driven by urgency and more by the satisfying accumulation of a life being built with intention. The ranch expanded. The Henderson breeding arrangement worked exactly as Eliza had projected, and by the following spring, the cattle operation was running at a profitability that Nathan described as better than it's ever been, and that Eliza described as about where it should be once the numbers are organized correctly, and they had that argument cheerfully over the supper table while Buddy sided with whoever he thought was currently winning, which was always Eliza. Clara came in the fall. She arrived unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon with a small trunk, and the compressed dignity she always carried, and the news that she had decided what she wanted to do with not knowing. What she had decided was that she wanted to work on a ranch where she was paid actual wages for actual work, and that she had heard through certain channels that the coal ranch might have a position. Nathan looked at Eliza. Eliza looked at Nathan. "What do you know about chickens?" Eliza asked Clara. "Everything," Clara said. "I've been managing a flock since I was 9. "We have 17, Eliza said. "They're disorganized." "I can fix that," Clara said. "You're hired," said Nathan. Buddy shook Clara's hand with the formality of a man welcoming an equal, which she was, and showed her to the room that had been the storage room and had been quietly converted over the previous month, because Eliza had been expecting this and had not mentioned it to Nathan until the week before, when she had said simply, "I think we should make the storage room livable." And he had said, "I was wondering when you'd say that," and they had spent a Saturday doing it together. The ranch was different now, fuller. Louder in the mornings, in the particular way that happens when more than 2 people share a space and bring their habits and their voices into the common areas. Eliza had not realized how much she had missed that the sound of a household that was actually inhabited. She had not realized how many things she had missed until she stopped missing them. Rosa wrote from Tucson in November. Short letter, good handwriting, better than the frightened note from 6 months ago. She had found work at a hotel that paid real wages. She had seen her mother. She was taking reading lessons on Tuesday evenings. "I think about what you said in the letter," she wrote, "about not being the debt they say you are. I think about it a lot. I think you should know that." Eliza read the letter at her desk. She wrote back the same day. The criminal case against Caleb Thornton concluded in the February of the following year in a Prescott courtroom, with Eliza's written testimony entered into the record and Clara's appearing beside it, and Rosa's alongside those. Thornton was found guilty on 2 counts of unlawful labor confinement and 1 count of fraudulent contract inducement. The Fitch agency in Pennsylvania was dissolved by order of the State Labor Board the following month. Whitfield sent word by telegraph, the first telegraph message Eliza had ever received, which arrived at the Prescott office and was delivered by Ryder to the ranch on a cold, bright February morning. She read it standing in the yard with her breath making clouds in the morning air. Guilty on all counts. Cross-sentenced 3 years confinement and substantial fine. Ranch operation suspended pending review. Thought you'd want to know immediately. Whitfield. She stood with it for a moment. Then she turned and went inside and put it on the kitchen table in front of Nathan, who read it, and set it down and looked at her with everything she needed to see in his face, and said nothing for a moment, because there was nothing to say that the moment didn't already contain. Then he said, "It's done." "It's done," she said. Buddy read the telegram over Nathan's shoulder and said, "Good on her," with the complete finality of a man delivering a verdict, and went back to his breakfast. Clara read it and nodded once slowly with the expression of a woman who has been waiting for something for a long time and is receiving it with the dignity it deserves. That evening, Nathan and Eliza stood on the porch together in the February cold. Neither of them had suggested it. They had simply both ended up there, the way they often simply ended up in the same place without arranging it. And she thought about the morning she had arrived at Thornton's ranch with a worn traveling bag and a letter she had read too many times, and the desperate hope of a woman who had run out of other choices. She thought about the floor of the yard, the flour sack, the watching crowd. She thought about the sound of boots on dry ground and a man who had taken his hat off before he spoke to her. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I wrote to my sister Margaret last week, the first letter I've sent her since I left Pennsylvania." He turned to look at her. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was well," she said. "I told her about the ranch, about the hearing and Thornton and what happened." She paused. "And I told her about you." The cold air moved between them. "What did you tell her about me?" he asked. She looked at him. In the evening light, in the familiar angles of his face that had become the most known thing in her world, she felt something move through her that was not uncertainty and was not longing, and was not the fragile, desperate hope she had carried out of Pennsylvania. It was certainty, complete and settled and unafraid. "I told her," she said, "that I had found the place where my real story begins." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not tentatively, not as a question, as a man who has made a decision and is acting on it with the same complete simplicity with which he acted on everything that mattered to him. She held his hand. "Eliza Harper," he said. "Nathan Cole," she said. And that was all, and it was entirely enough, and the desert night settled around them with the quiet authority of a thing that has always been true, and has simply finally been allowed to be said. Inside, Buddy was laughing at something Clara had said, and the fire was going, and there was food on the table, and the desk in the corner held a stack of letters that were still to be written, and sent, and answered. The cattle operation was running at its best numbers ever. The garden would need turning when the ground softened. There was a loose board on the east wall of the barn that Nathan had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. There was work. There was always work. And there was this man and this woman standing on the porch of a small mountain ranch in the Colorado foothills, holding on, both of them having traveled through the worst of what the world had put on them, and having arrived, finally, in the same place. She had been called too weak to survive. She had been humiliated in front of a crowd of witnesses who did nothing. She had signed her name to a document designed to trap her, and then figured out line by line and number by number how to dismantle it. She had stood in a territorial court and spoken every truth she carried until the room had no choice but to hear it. She had found in a small ranch 9 miles from where she had almost broken the thing that rebuilt her, not a rescue, but a recognition. Not a man who saved her, but a man who saw her clearly and completely and found what he saw worth standing beside. She was not the woman who had collapsed in Caleb Thornton's yard. She was the woman who had gotten up. And she never, not once, not for a single day in all the years that followed, forgot the difference.